Hi, this is Kevin Lin with Magoosh, and in this video I want to give you 5 tips for improving your logical reasoning score. This advice will be both about how to approach the section as you're actually taking it during the timed exam, and also about how you should approach studying for logical reasoning. Starting with the advice related to how you should actually approach the section when you're taking it, number 1, read slowly and stop after each sentence to think about what you just read before you move on to the next sentence. Now, I know that sounds like very basic advice, but I think it's important to emphasize because sometimes what happens is students get so caught up in the timing aspect of the exam that they feel like they have to read as fast as they possibly can, or they feel like they have to skim, and both of these are things that will actively hurt your score, both in logical reasoning and in the test overall. Every single word can matter in logical reasoning, and some of these sentences are written in such a complicated way that you can't really understand what they're saying if you read it quickly, even if you read it at your normal pace. Sometimes what's required is you have to stop and pause and think about what you just read, or sometimes even break individual sentences down into different clauses and just read one clause at a time. Now, another reason that reading slowly and stopping between each sentence can help you is that logical reasoning is all about the relationship between the different statements in the stimulus. And sometimes what happens is if you just read the paragraph, read the stimulus quickly without stopping to digest what it's saying, you're going to have to double back and you're going to have to reread different statements multiple times to figure out what's the conclusion, what's the premise, what's wrong with the argument. But if you actually just did that the first time you read through the stimulus, if you stopped after the first sentence, thought about it, does it sound like a conclusion? Does it sound like a premise? Does it sound like something the author is about to reject and refute? If you stop and think about these questions, then what you'll find is oftentimes by the time you get to the end of a stimulus, the whole paragraph will make sense and you'll already know what the point of the argument was. You'll already know and be able to summarize the reasoning and what's flawed about it. So that's why it's really important to read slowly and pause between each sentence. Tip number 2, predict the answers before going to the answer choices. Now that is probably the number one thing that separates people who are excellent at logical reasoning and people who are still struggling with this section. What you will find is that the key to working through LR efficiently and accurately is making predictions based on what you read in the stimulus and what the question is asking you. Far too often what students will do is they will just passively go to the answer choices and read each answer choice thinking, could this be correct? Could this be correct? Could answer choice C be correct? What about this one? When actually what you should be doing is making predictions. If you read the stimulus carefully and you know what the question is asking you, you can often know exactly what the issue is that the right answer should relate to. For example, if it's a flaw question, you can identify up front. There's a correlation to causation fallacy going on. So let me look for an answer that is describing that fallacy. And there are some problems where you can even make more specific predictions, such as sufficient assumption problems, where if you identify the precise gap between the premises and the conclusion, you know the kind of answer that needs to link that gap. Even in the cases where you're unable to make a prediction about the correct answer, maybe you can't even predict the issue that the correct answer should relate to. Even in those cases, trying to make a prediction is still going to be helpful because it just forces you to spend a little bit more time with the stimulus. It forces you to digest the stimulus a little bit more, and that is critical for having a chance at getting to the right answer. So always try to predict the answer before you go to the answer choices. Now for the tips related to how to study for the logical reasoning section. Number 3, master the different question types. Now what do I mean by that? I mean master how to identify each of the different question types. Master your approach, your strategy for the different question types. Master the tendencies for the correct answers and the wrong answers depending on the question type. And this entails mastering the tricks that the LSAT tries to pull to disguise the correct answer or to tempt you into a wrong answer. Now don't get me wrong, there are a lot of similarities between the different question types, but there are also important differences that can matter to getting a question correct or getting it incorrect. So make sure you prioritize mastering the different question types when you're studying for this exam. To help you out, here is a list of the different question types in logical reasoning that you want to make sure you have an approach for. First, we have the argument structure-based questions. These are questions that are dependent on understanding how the different pieces of the argument fit together. These are main point questions, method of reasoning, role, and parallel reasoning questions. Then we have the assumption-based questions, which are based on identifying assumptions and flaws in arguments. Here we have the flawed reasoning question, necessary assumption, sufficient assumption, strengthen and weaken questions. Then we have the inference-based questions, which are the must-be-true questions, most strongly supported questions, and the disagree-agree questions. Finally, we have the paradox question type, which kind of stands outside of the other three categories. And in this question type, you're presented with an apparent contradiction in the stimulus, and you're looking for an answer that explains that contradiction. Tip number 4, master the fundamental logical reasoning concepts. Now, this is more important than understanding the different question types because these core logical reasoning concepts are going to appear in almost every single logical reasoning question. What are the concepts I'm talking about? Well, first we have argument structure related concepts. Make sure you understand how to identify a conclusion, how to identify a premise. Make sure you understand the difference between main conclusions and intermediate conclusions. Make sure you understand different methods of reasoning. These include things like analogy, using a principle, examples, sampling. Make sure you understand conditional reasoning. This includes things like the contrapositive. Make sure you understand how to use a conditional statement and how not to use a conditional statement. And another core logical reasoning concept is causal reasoning. Make sure you understand what a correlation is and why it doesn't prove cause. Make sure you understand how to strengthen and weaken causal relationships. And finally, make sure you understand all of the common logical reasoning fallacies that show up on the LSAT. So when you're studying, instead of just doing random problem after random problem, make sure you take some time to actually target these different concept areas for your practice. Tip number 5, review your mistakes as if you had to teach the question. Far too often, students will just engage in a very superficial kind of review where they'll look at the answer key, they'll look at the correct answer, and they'll say, yeah, it makes sense, and then they'll just move on. But if you really want to improve your score, what's required is a much deeper kind of review. You have to understand the question to the point where you would be able to explain it to somebody else. And that requires you to get into exactly why you got the question wrong. Think about what made you attracted to the wrong answer. What made you pick it? Think about why that reason is not correct. Why the reason you use to pick the wrong answer is flawed. And you also have to think about what made you avoid the correct answer. Why didn't you like the right answer? And what's wrong with that? What was wrong about your reason for avoiding the correct answer? If you engage in this deeper kind of review, you're going to learn a lot more from your mistakes and stand a better chance of avoiding repeating the same issues that caused you to get questions wrong in the past. So those were 5 tips for approaching and studying for the logical reasoning section. If you follow them, I am confident that you will improve your score. Now, before I leave you, I want to remind you to like and subscribe to this channel for more free LSAT content, and feel free to leave a question in the comments below.